I never thought a snowblower at midnight would become my weapon of choice. But when Patricia Whitmore from the Homeowners Association fined me $200 for clearing my driveway too early in the morning, I decided that petty had only just begun. It started 3 weeks before Christmas in Boulder, Colorado, where I had moved 6 months earlier after landing a software engineering position at a tech startup downtown. The neighborhood of Pinewood Estates looked perfect on paper, a quiet suburban community with tree-lined streets and well-maintained homes that gave off that wholesome American dream vibe. What the real estate agent failed to mention was that our HOA president, Patricia, treated the community bylaws like they were federal legislation and herself like she was judge, jury, and executioner. My name is Stephen Baker, and I am a man who values 2 things above all else: my morning routine and common sense. Both of those were about to be tested in ways I could never have imagined. The first snow of the season came down hard on a Tuesday night, dumping nearly 8 inches of powder across the Front Range. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning like I always did, looked out my bedroom window, and saw my driveway buried under a white blanket. My work-from-home setup meant I did not technically need to drive anywhere, but I had a video conference at 8 and grocery shopping planned for later. Besides, I grew up in Minnesota where you cleared snow as soon as it stopped falling, not whenever some arbitrary rule said you could. I threw on my winter coat, grabbed my coffee, and headed to the garage. My snowblower was a beauty, a 2-stage Ariens machine I had purchased the week before in anticipation of Colorado winters. It roared to life with a satisfying rumble, and I started clearing my driveway with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The sun had not yet risen, and the streetlights cast an orange glow over the pristine snow. I was making good progress, creating neat paths down my driveway, and even doing a courtesy pass on the sidewalk in front of my house. The cold air felt refreshing, and I was enjoying the physical work after sitting at a computer all day yesterday. That is when I saw her. Patricia Whitmore, bundled up in a puffy jacket that made her look like a burgundy marshmallow, marching across the street toward my property with the determination of a general leading troops into battle. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it probably gave her a headache, and her face had that pinched expression of someone who had been personally offended by your very existence. "Excuse me," she shouted over the sound of my snowblower. "Excuse me, you need to turn that off right now." I killed the engine and pulled out my earbuds. "Sorry, what? Do you have any idea what time it is?" Patricia demanded, crossing her arms over her chest. I glanced at my watch. 6:15. I wanted to get this done before my morning meeting. The HOA noise ordinance clearly states that no loud machinery can be operated before 7 in the morning on weekdays and 8 on weekends, she said, her voice dripping with the kind of satisfaction people get when they think they have caught you breaking a rule. "You are disturbing the entire neighborhood." I looked around at the quiet street. Not a single light had turned on in any of the neighboring houses. "I am just clearing my driveway. It will take me maybe another 10 minutes. That is not the point. Rules are rules and they exist for a reason. Everyone in this community agreed to follow them when they purchased their homes." Patricia pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of me, my snowblower, and my half-cleared driveway. "You will be receiving a formal notice of violation." "You cannot be serious," I said, feeling my morning zen evaporating like mist in sunlight. "I am extremely serious, Mr. Baker. This is your first violation, so the fine will be $200. Any subsequent violations will result in increased penalties." She smiled then, not a friendly smile but the kind that said she was enjoying this way too much. I suggest you familiarize yourself with the community guidelines. They were included in your welcome packet." Patricia turned on her heel and marched back toward her house, which was conveniently located directly across the street from mine. I stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, snowblower silent, feeling a mix of disbelief and irritation coursing through my veins. $200 for clearing snow early. $200 because I wanted to be responsible and make sure my property was safe and accessible. The absurdity of it made my blood boil, but I took a deep breath and reminded myself that getting angry would not help anything. I would pay the fine, adjust my schedule, and move on with my life. Except that is not what happened at all. The formal notice arrived in my mailbox 3 days later, typed on official HOA letterhead with Patricia's signature at the bottom. It outlined my violation in excruciating detail, including the exact time I had started my snowblower, the duration of the noise, and citations to 3 different sections of the community bylaws. The invoice for $200 was attached with instructions to pay within 30 days or face additional late fees. I paid it immediately, not wanting to give Patricia any more ammunition. But the whole situation left a bad taste in my mouth. I started paying more attention to the neighborhood, watching how Patricia operated her little kingdom. What I discovered made my jaw drop. Patricia cleared her own driveway at 6 in the morning. I know because the second snowfall came that Friday, and I happened to be up early finishing some work code. I heard the familiar rumble of a snowblower and looked out to see Patricia, in her burgundy marshmallow jacket, clearing her driveway in the pre-dawn darkness. The hypocrisy was staggering. She had fined me for doing the exact thing she was currently doing. I grabbed my phone and started recording, making sure to capture the timestamp and her license plate clearly visible in the frame. If she wanted to play games, I could play too, but I did not confront her immediately. Instead, I did some research. I pulled up the complete HOA bylaws online and read through all 73 pages of regulations. What I found was interesting. The noise ordinance did exist, but there was a clause that allowed for exceptions in cases of safety or emergency. Heavy snowfall that could impede access for emergency vehicles certainly seemed like it would qualify. I also discovered that HOA board members were not exempt from the rules. In fact, there was an entire section about how board members should lead by example and face double penalties for violations. Patricia had violated her own rules and, according to the bylaws, should owe a $400 fine. Monday morning, I sent a formal complaint to the HOA board via email, including my video evidence and citations to the relevant bylaws. I kept my tone professional and factual, laying out exactly what had happened and requesting that Patricia face the same consequences she had imposed on me. The response came from Patricia herself 2 days later. She claimed that her situation was different because she had a medical appointment that morning and needed to clear her driveway for safety reasons. The email was dismissive and condescending, suggesting that I should focus on following the rules rather than looking for ways to avoid consequences. I replied, pointing out that the bylaws made no exception for medical appointments and that if safety was a concern, the emergency clause should apply equally to all residents. I also noted that I had not been given an opportunity to explain my situation before being fined. Patricia's second email was shorter and more hostile. She informed me that the board had reviewed my complaint and found it without merit. The matter was closed, and any further correspondence on the topic would be considered harassment. That was when I decided that if Patricia wanted to weaponize the HOA rules, I would become an expert in following them to the absolute letter while making her life as inconvenient as possible. The next snowfall came on a Sunday night. Perfect timing. I waited until exactly midnight, which was technically Monday morning and well within the weekday noise ordinance window of 7 a.m. I bundled up, grabbed my snowblower, and headed outside. The snowblower roared to life at 12:03 in the morning, shattering the peaceful silence of Pinewood Estates. I took my time, making careful passes up and down my driveway. The machine was loud, really loud, and the sound echoed off the houses in the quiet suburban night. But I was not breaking any rules. The noise ordinance only restricted operations before 7 a.m., not after midnight. I cleared my driveway, then the sidewalk in front of my house, then decided to be a really good neighbor and cleared the sidewalk all the way to the corner. It took me 45 minutes, and by the time I was done, lights were on in several houses, including Patricia's. She came storming out of her house in a bathrobe and slippers, her face red with fury. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" "Clearing snow," I said pleasantly, turning off the snowblower. "Is there a problem?" "It is midnight. People are trying to sleep. The noise ordinance restricts loud machinery before 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. on weekends," I recited from memory. "It is currently 12:48 a.m. on Monday morning. I am in full compliance with all HOA regulations." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "That is not the spirit of the rule. The spirit does not matter, Patricia. Rules are rules. You said so yourself." I gave her my best innocent smile. "I am just being a responsible homeowner and making sure my property is clear and safe." "This is harassment," she sputtered. "No, this is snow removal. Have a good night." I pushed my snowblower back into the garage and went inside, feeling more satisfied than I had in weeks. The next morning, my doorbell rang at 7:15. I answered to find Patricia standing there with two other people, a balding man in his 50s and a woman with gray, streaked brown hair. Patricia introduced them as Derek Holmes and Margaret Chen, the other two members of the HOA board. "We need to discuss your behavior last night," Patricia began without preamble. "Please come in," I said, stepping aside. I led them to my living room, where I had conveniently left the HOA bylaws open on my coffee table. Derek cleared his throat. "Mr. Baker, while we appreciate that you were technically within the noise ordinance guidelines, clearing snow at midnight is disruptive and inconsiderate." "I agree completely," I said. "Just like fining someone for clearing snow at 6 in the morning is petty and hypocritical, especially when the HOA president does the same thing." Margaret glanced at Patricia, who kept her face carefully neutral. "We are not here to discuss past incidents." "Then why are you here?" I asked. "I followed every rule. I cleared my snow during permitted hours. If the HOA wants to change the noise ordinance to restrict late-night snow removal, that requires a community vote according to Article 12, Section 4 of the bylaws." I could see Derek and Margaret were uncomfortable. Patricia was vibrating with barely contained rage. "We are asking you, as a reasonable person, to show consideration for your neighbors," Derek tried. "I absolutely will, as soon as I receive a full refund of my $200 fine and a formal apology from the HOA for the discriminatory enforcement of community rules." I kept my voice level and professional. "I have documented evidence that Patricia violated the same ordinance she fined me for, and according to the bylaws, board members face double penalties. Until that is addressed, I will continue to clear my snow whenever it is most convenient for me within the permitted hours." Patricia stood abruptly. "This is extortion." "No, this is holding you accountable," I corrected. You made this personal when you singled me out for a fine while ignoring your own violations. I am just ensuring equal treatment under the HOA rules." The meeting ended shortly after that, with Patricia storming out and Derek and Margaret following more reluctantly. I could see they were not entirely on Patricia's side, but they also were not willing to cross her openly. 2 days later, another snowfall blanketed the neighborhood. This one started in the evening and continued through the night, accumulating about 6 inches. I waited until 1 in the morning and fired up my snowblower again. This time, I was even more thorough. I cleared my driveway, both sides of my sidewalk, and even helped clear around my neighbor's mailbox. The snowblower rumbled and roared through the night, and I took my sweet time, making sure every pass was perfect. It took me a full hour. Lights turned on up and down the street. I saw curtains moving as people looked out to see what the noise was. Patricia's house was lit up like a Christmas tree, but she did not come outside, probably because she knew I was not breaking any rules. The next morning, I found a handwritten note in my mailbox. It was from Jerry Wilson, who lived 3 houses down. He wrote that while he understood I was following the rules, the late-night snow clearing was keeping him and his wife awake, and they both had to work early. He asked if there was any way I could clear snow during more reasonable hours. I felt a pang of guilt. Jerry and his wife Linda were nice people. They had welcomed me to the neighborhood with homemade cookies when I first moved in. They did not deserve to lose sleep because of my war with Patricia. That afternoon, I walked over to Jerry's house and knocked on the door. He answered looking tired, with dark circles under his eyes. "Hey Jerry, I got your note," I said. "I want to explain what is going on." I told him the whole story, from my original fine to Patricia's hypocrisy to her refusal to address the discriminatory treatment. Jerry listened, nodding occasionally. "So you are clearing snow at midnight to prove a point," he said when I finished. "Basically, yes. But I am also trying to force the HOA to either enforce rules fairly or change them." I rubbed the back of my neck. "Look, I am sorry you and Linda are caught in the middle. That was not my intention," Jerry sighed. "Patricia has been a problem for years. She treats this neighborhood like it is her personal fiefdom. Most of us are too tired to fight her." "Well, I am not," I said. "But I also do not want to make your life miserable. How about this? I will knock on doors and let people know what is happening. If enough neighbors support changing the noise ordinance or holding Patricia accountable, we can handle this through proper channels." "And if they do not?" Jerry asked. "Then I will consider adjusting my approach, but I am not paying that fine or accepting Patricia's double standard without a fight." Jerry considered this, then nodded. "Fair enough. And for what it is worth, I think what Patricia did to you was wrong. She fined the Martinez family last year for painting their front door without HOA approval, even though the color was literally already on the approved list. She just did not like them. This was news to me." "Really?" "Yeah. They fought it for months before finally giving up and paying. Patricia has a history of using the HOA rules to bully people she does not like." Jerry leaned against his doorframe. "If you are really going to take her on, you might have allies in the neighborhood, but be prepared, she does not lose gracefully." Over the next few days, I talked to more neighbors. What I discovered was disturbing. Patricia had been HOA president for 8 years, and during that time, she had fined, sanctioned, or harassed dozens of residents for minor or questionable violations. The Martinez family story was just the tip of the iceberg. There was the Thompson family who got fined because their grass was supposedly a 1/4 inch too tall, measured with a ruler Patricia brought to their property. The Petersons who received a violation notice for having a decorative garden gnome that Patricia deemed aesthetically inconsistent with neighborhood standards. The Chen family, no relation to board member Margaret Chen, who were threatened with legal action because their teenage daughter's car was allegedly parked on the street too many nights in a row. Everyone had a Patricia story, and everyone was frustrated. But most people felt powerless to do anything about it. Patricia controlled the board meetings, set the agendas, and had worn down anyone who tried to challenge her over the years. I realized I had stumbled into something bigger than a petty dispute over snow removal. This was about an abuse of power that had gone unchecked for too long. The next snowfall came on a Friday night. I posted in the neighborhood Facebook group earlier that day, explaining exactly why I would be clearing snow at midnight and inviting anyone who wanted change to join me for a neighborhood meeting on Sunday afternoon. At 11:55 p.m., I stood in my driveway with my snowblower ready. To my surprise, I was not alone. Jerry was there with his snowblower, so was Miguel Martinez and his teenage son. The Thompsons brought their shovels. In total, about 8 neighbors gathered in the cold night air. "Are we really doing this?" Miguel asked with a grin. "We are making a point," I said. "Midnight snow removal party, completely within HOA guidelines." At exactly midnight we started. The combined noise of multiple snowblowers and people calling out to each other shattered the night's silence. We cleared driveways, sidewalks, and even helped the elderly Mrs. Patterson who lived at the corner and could not manage the snow herself. It was loud, it was excessive, and it was absolutely within the rules. Patricia came outside at 12:30, looking apoplectic. She tried to yell at us, but her voice was drowned out by the snowblowers. Several other neighbors came out too, some angry about the noise, others curious about what was happening. I killed my snowblower engine and raised my hand. Others followed suit until the street was quiet except for the sound of wind and falling snow. "For anyone wondering what is going on," I called out loudly enough for everyone to hear, "we are exercising our right to clear snow during HOA-permitted hours. The noise ordinance only restricts machinery before 7 a.m. on weekdays and 8 a.m. on weekends. We are in full compliance." "This is insane," Patricia shouted. "You are all acting like children." "No, we are acting like residents who are tired of arbitrary enforcement and discrimination," Miguel called back. "You fined my family $300 for a door color that was on the approved list, Patricia. You owe us an apology and a refund." "And you measured my grass with a ruler," Mr. Thompson added. "That is not normal behavior." More voices joined in, people sharing their grievances with Patricia while she stood in the middle of the street looking cornered. This was not part of my plan, but I was not going to stop it either. Finally, Patricia held up her hands. "Fine, you want a meeting? We will have a meeting. Monday night, 7 p.m. at the community center. Air all your complaints then." "That is not good enough," I said. "We want an independent review of all HOA fines from the past 3 years and a vote on new board leadership." "That is not how this works," Patricia snapped. "Actually, it is." I pulled out my phone where I had the bylaws bookmarked. Article 5, Section 7. Any resident can call for a leadership review vote with signatures from 25% of homeowners. There are 82 homes in this community, which means we need 21 signatures. "And we will get them," Jerry added firmly. Patricia looked around at the gathered neighbors, many of whom were nodding in agreement. For the first time since I had met her, she looked uncertain. "This is not over," she said, then turned and walked back to her house. We finished our midnight snow removal, and then several of us gathered in my living room to warm up with coffee and hot chocolate. The energy was electric. People were excited, angry, and hopeful all at once. "I cannot believe we are actually doing this," Linda Wilson said, cradling her mug. "I have wanted someone to stand up to Patricia for years." "Why did not you?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Fear, mostly," she admitted. "Patricia knows how to make your life difficult. She has connections in local government, friends on the city council. People worry that crossing her will lead to problems beyond just HOA fines." "That is exactly why this needs to be a group effort," Miguel said. "She cannot bully all of us." We spent the next hour planning our strategy. We would collect signatures for the leadership review vote, document all the questionable fines and violations Patricia had issued, and prepare for the Monday meeting. Several people volunteered to reach out to neighbors who were not at tonight's gathering. By the time everyone left around 3 in the morning, I felt something I had not felt since this whole mess started. Hope. Not just hope that I would get my $200 back, but hope that we could actually change something broken in our community. Saturday morning, I woke up late and checked my email to find a message from an address I did not recognize. The subject line read, "You need to stop." The email was anonymous but clearly from someone who supported Patricia. It warned me that I was making powerful enemies, and that continuing down this path would result in consequences I would regret. The tone was threatening without making any specific threats, probably to avoid legal issues. I forwarded it to several of the neighbors from last night with a note that we should document any intimidation attempts. Jerry replied within minutes saying he had received a similar email. So had Miguel and the Thompsons. Patricia was scared, and scared people do desperate things. Sunday afternoon's meeting at my house drew over 30 neighbors, far more than I had expected. We had to move outside to my back patio, and even then people were standing. I had printed out copies of the relevant HOA bylaws and created a simple petition for the leadership review vote. Derek Holmes and Margaret Chen showed up, which surprised everyone. They stood at the back looking uncomfortable. "Thank you all for coming," I started. "I know many of you have your own issues with how the HOA has been managed, but let me be clear about what we are trying to accomplish here. This is not about chaos or ignoring rules. This is about fair and consistent enforcement, transparency in decision-making, and leadership that serves the community rather than personal agendas." I went through the major issues. Patricia's hypocritical enforcement of the noise ordinance, the Martinez family's door color fine, the Thompsons' grass measuring incident, and several others that people had shared with me. With each example, I showed how the bylaws were either misapplied or selectively enforced. The HOA is supposed to maintain property values and create a pleasant living environment, I continued. But when residents live in fear of arbitrary fines and harassment, that does the opposite. "We need change." Margaret Chen raised her hand. "Can I say something?" Everyone turned to look at her. She stepped forward, her expression troubled. "I have been on the HOA board for 3 years," she began, "and I want to apologize. I have watched Patricia overreach again and again, and I did not have the courage to push back. Derek and I have disagreed with many of her decisions, but she is very forceful, and it was easier to go along than to fight." "So you admit the fines were wrong?" Miguel asked. "Many of them, yes." "The door color situation with your family was ridiculous, Miguel. I voted against that fine, but Patricia overruled me." Margaret looked around at the gathered neighbors. "If you are calling for new leadership, I support it. The board needs people who will actually serve the community's interests." Derek nodded in agreement. "Same here. I am tired of being Patricia's rubber stamp." This was a game changer. With 2 board members openly supporting our effort, we had legitimacy. We passed around the petition and people eagerly signed. By the end of the meeting, we had 43 signatures, double what we needed. We also had a list of volunteers who would help organize the official vote and spread the word to neighbors who were not present. Monday's meeting at the community center was packed. Nearly every household in Pinewood Estates sent at least one representative. The room buzzed with conversation as people filed in and found seats. Patricia sat at the front table with Derek and Margaret, looking like she had not slept well. Her usual confidence had been replaced with a brittle defensiveness. I arrived with Jerry, Miguel, and several other core members of what people were jokingly calling the Midnight Snow Brigade. We had prepared a formal presentation outlining our concerns and demands. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately tried to take control of the agenda. We are here tonight to address some concerns that have been raised about HOA management. I want to assure everyone that the board takes these concerns seriously, and we are committed to transparency. Then you will have no problem with a leadership review vote, I said from my seat. Patricia's jaw tightened. That is not necessary. Any issues can be addressed through proper channels. We used proper channels. Miguel stood up. We submitted formal complaints that were ignored or dismissed. The bylaws give us the right to call for this vote, and we have more than enough signatures. Derek cleared his throat. Patricia, they are right. Article 5, Section 7 is clear. With the signatures they have collected, we are required to hold a leadership review vote. This is a coup, Patricia said, her voice rising. A coordinated attack by a few disgruntled residents who do not want to follow the rules. No, this is democracy, Margaret corrected gently, and it is long overdue. What followed was 3 hours of heated discussion. Residents stood up one after another, sharing their experiences with Patricia's leadership. Some defended her, particularly her close friends and allies, but they were vastly outnumbered by people calling for change. The most damning moment came when elderly Mrs. Patterson stood up, leaning on her walker. I have lived in this neighborhood for 30 years, she said in a wavering voice. I remember when HOAs were about helping each other, not punishing each other. Patricia, you fined me last spring for having dandelions in my lawn. I am 84 years old. I cannot keep up with the yard work like I used to, and you showed no compassion. That fine took money I needed for my medications. The room went silent. Even Patricia's supporters looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Patterson, there are resources available if you need help with yard maintenance, Patricia said stiffly. You did not offer resources. You offered a fine and a threat of further action if I did not comply immediately. Mrs. Patterson shook her head. This neighborhood used to feel like home. Now it feels like living under surveillance. That seemed to break something. More people stood up, sharing similar stories of feeling harassed, anxious, and unwelcome in their own homes because of Patricia's aggressive enforcement. Finally, Derek stood and formally motioned for a leadership review vote to be scheduled within 30 days, as required by the bylaws. Margaret seconded. Even Patricia could not vote against it without looking like a tyrant, so the motion passed. As people filed out, Patricia approached me. Her face was flushed, and her eyes were hard. You have destroyed me, she said quietly, her voice shaking with emotion. I have given 8 years to this community, trying to maintain standards and property values, and this is the thanks I get. You fine a sweet old lady for dandelions, I said, keeping my voice level. You measure people's grass with rulers. You enforce rules against others that you break yourself. That is not leadership, Patricia. That is tyranny. You know nothing about what it takes to run a community like this, she hissed. Everyone wants to complain, but no one wants to volunteer. No one wants to serve on committees. No one wants to do the actual work. I do everything. No one asked you to be a dictator, I replied. People want reasonable leadership that serves the community's interests, not someone who uses the HOA as a personal power trip. Patricia opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to deflate. She looked around at the emptying community center, at the neighbors who were carefully avoiding eye contact with her, and I saw something crack in her expression. "I was trying to help," she said, and for the first time, she sounded genuinely hurt rather than angry. "Property values have increased 30% since I became president. The neighborhood looks beautiful. I thought that is what people wanted. People want to feel safe in their homes, Patricia. They want to know they will not get fined for minor mistakes or subjective judgments. They want fairness." I softened my tone slightly. "If you had enforced rules consistently and with compassion, we would not be here." She did not respond, just turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the nearly empty room. Over the next 3 weeks, the campaign for new HOA leadership became the talk of Pinewood Estates. A slate of candidates emerged to challenge Patricia and run for the other board positions. Jerry Wilson agreed to run for president. Miguel Martinez and Linda Wilson volunteered for the other 2 board seats. Patricia initially said she would run for re-election, but as the vote approached and it became clear she had lost support even among her former allies, she quietly withdrew her candidacy. She put her house on the market and stopped attending neighborhood gatherings. I felt conflicted about that. On one hand, she had brought this on herself through years of heavy-handed leadership. On the other hand, seeing someone essentially driven from their home felt like a Pyrrhic victory. The vote took place on a cold February evening. Turnout was the highest in Pinewood Estates history, with 76 of 82 households represented. Jerry, Miguel, and Linda won their races by overwhelming margins. One of the new board's first actions was to review all fines issued in the past 3 years. They overturned 19 of them, including mine, the Martinez family's door color fine, and Mrs. Patterson's dandelion fine. They also revised the noise ordinance to be more reasonable, establishing quiet hours from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. on weekdays and 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. on weekends, with explicit exceptions for safety concerns like snow removal. They also implemented a new appeals process for violations and required that all enforcement actions be reviewed by the full board rather than being issued unilaterally by the president. The changes were not revolutionary, but they were meaningful. People started to relax. The anxious feeling that had hung over the neighborhood dissipated. At the March community meeting, we actually discussed things like organizing a neighborhood garage sale and planning a summer block party, rather than arguing about violations and fines. Patricia's house sold in April to a young family with 2 kids. I saw the moving truck outside her place and felt compelled to walk over. She was supervising the movers, directing them with the same precise attention to detail she had brought to her HOA presidency. "Where are you headed?" I asked. She looked surprised to see me. "Arizona. My sister lives in Scottsdale. I will be near family." "That sounds nice," I said awkwardly. "Look, Patricia, I know things got ugly between us. You ruined my reputation," she said flatly. "No, your actions did that. I just held you accountable." I paused. "But for what it is worth, I do not think you were trying to be cruel. I think you lost perspective somewhere along the way." Patricia was quiet for a long moment, watching the movers carry boxes into the truck. "Maybe you are right," she finally said. "When you spend so much time enforcing rules, you start to see everything as a potential violation. Everyone becomes a problem to be managed rather than a neighbor to know." "The new board is doing good work," I offered. "The neighborhood is in good hands." "Good." She said it without sarcasm, and I believed her. I hope you are all very happy together." She did not say goodbye, just turned and walked back into her house. I never saw her again. That summer, Pinewood Estates threw its first annual block party. The new board organized it, but it was truly a community effort. People set up grills and smokers, brought side dishes and desserts, and kids ran through sprinklers in front yards. Someone set up a volleyball net in the cul-de-sac. I was manning the grill, flipping burgers, when Mrs. Patterson approached with her walker. She moved slowly but steadily, and her face had more color than I remembered from the winter. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said. "That fine you got overturned, the money came back right when I needed it. My granddaughter is getting married next month, and now I can afford to travel to the wedding." "I am really glad, Mrs. Patterson. You should not have been fined in the first place. You did a brave thing standing up to Patricia," she continued. "Most people would have just paid the fine and moved on." "I probably would have if she had not been such a hypocrite about it," I admitted. "The midnight snow removal thing was pretty petty." Mrs. Patterson laughed, a warm sound that seemed to surprise even her. "It was also brilliant. Sometimes you have to meet unreasonable people with creative solutions." As the sun set that evening, and the party continued under string lights, someone had hung between houses. I reflected on everything that had happened since that first fine last December. A $200 snow removal penalty had sparked a chain of events that changed our entire community. I had learned something important through this experience. Small acts of injustice are often symptoms of larger problems, and addressing them requires courage, persistence, and community solidarity. No one could have taken on Patricia alone, but together we had created meaningful change. The following winter, when the first snow fell, I cleared my driveway at 7 in the morning like a reasonable person. No midnight snow removal, no petty revenge, no power struggles. Just a guy taking care of his property in a neighborhood that finally felt like home. Jerry stopped by while I was finishing up, pushing his own snowblower. "Need help with the sidewalk?" "Sure," I said. "Want to grab coffee after? Sounds good. Linda is making her famous cinnamon rolls if you want to come by the house." This, I thought, was what a neighborhood was supposed to be. People helping each other, sharing food and conversation, living as a community rather than as isolated households governed by arbitrary rules and power-hungry leadership. That did not mean everything was perfect. The HOA still had rules, and they still needed to be enforced sometimes. But the new board approached violations with common sense and compassion, treating residents as neighbors first and rule breakers second. In March, a new family moved into Patricia's old house. They had 2 young kids, and a golden retriever that immediately became the neighborhood's unofficial mascot. I brought over a welcome basket with some local favorites, a gift card to a nearby coffee shop, homemade cookies from Linda, and a copy of the HOA bylaws with a note that said, "The rules are reasonable now, promise." The husband, whose name was Tom, laughed when he read it. "We heard there was some drama with the old HOA president. Sounds like quite a story." "It was," I said, "but it had a happy ending. As spring turned to summer and summer to fall, life in Pinewood Estates settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new board proved to be effective and fair, making decisions that balanced community standards with individual freedom. Property values continued to rise, not because of aggressive enforcement, but because people actually wanted to live in a neighborhood where they felt welcomed and respected. I got promoted at work, started dating a woman I met at a local climbing gym, and generally felt more settled in Colorado than I ever had before. The midnight snow removal incident became a funny story I told at parties, The time I went to war with my HOA over a $200 fine and accidentally sparked a neighborhood revolution. But every now and then, usually late at night when I could not sleep, I thought about Patricia. I wondered if she was happy in Arizona, if she had learned anything from what happened, if she ever thought about Pinewood Estates. Part of me hoped she had found peace and perspective. Another part of me knew that people like Patricia rarely changed. They just found new domains to control and new rules to enforce. Either way, it was not my problem anymore. I had fought my battle, won my war, and helped create something better in the process. That was enough. The second winter in my house was blissfully drama-free. Snow fell. I cleared it during reasonable hours, and no one fined me or complained. The HOA had even purchased a small plow attachment for the community's riding mower, which volunteers used to clear the main sidewalks after heavy storms. It was a sensible solution that helped everyone, especially elderly residents like Mrs. Patterson who struggled with snow removal. In February, I got an unexpected email from Margaret Chen, now serving as the HOA vice president. The subject line read, "Thought you should know." Margaret wrote that Patricia had reached out to her, asking about the neighborhood and how things were going under the new leadership. They had exchanged several emails, and Patricia had apparently admitted that she had been too rigid and controlling during her tenure. She apologized to Margaret for putting her in difficult positions and expressed regret about how things had ended. "I thought you would want to know that she seems to have reflected on what happened," Margaret wrote. "I do not know if she would ever apologize to you directly, but I got the sense that she understands now that she went too far." I appreciated Margaret sharing that information. It provided a sense of closure I had not realized I needed. Patricia was not a villain in a story, just a person who had let power and perfectionism corrupt her judgment. She had paid a heavy price for it, forced to leave a neighborhood she had lived in for over a decade, but maybe that experience had taught her something valuable. I replied to Margaret thanking her for the update and moved on with my life. Spring arrived with the usual Colorado drama of snow one day and 70 degrees the next. The neighborhood started planning the second annual block party, and this time, I volunteered to help with organization. Jerry, Linda, Miguel, and I formed the planning committee, and we met one evening a week at different houses to coordinate details. It was during one of these meetings, held at my place in early May, that Jerry brought up an interesting idea. "What if we started a neighborhood fund to help residents who are struggling?" he proposed. "Like Mrs. Patterson with her yard work, or other elderly or disabled residents who might have trouble keeping up with maintenance." "That is a great idea," Linda said immediately. "We could organize volunteer days where people help with yard work, minor repairs, that kind of thing. And maybe set up a small fund for emergency expenses," Miguel added. "When my cousin lost his job last year, his HOA fined him for not trimming his hedges fast enough. If we had a support system, we could prevent situations like that." We drafted a proposal for the next community meeting, and it passed with overwhelming support. The Pinewood Estates Neighbor Fund was born, funded by voluntary donations and organized by volunteers. Within 3 months, we had helped 4 families with various projects and established a regular volunteer crew that did yard work for elderly residents every other Saturday. This, more than anything else, represented what we had fought for during the snow removal rebellion. We had transformed the HOA from an enforcement mechanism into a support system, from a source of anxiety into a source of community strength. 2 years after my first winter in Colorado, I stood on my deck watching snow fall on a quiet December evening. My girlfriend Emma was inside making hot chocolate, and we were planning to watch a movie later. Life was peaceful in a way I had not expected when I first moved to Boulder. The snowfall was light, just a dusting that would not require much clearing. But as I watched the white flakes drift down in the glow of streetlights, I smiled thinking about that midnight snow removal operation 2 winters ago. The absurdity of it, the noise and chaos, the look on Patricia's face when she realized we were technically following all the rules. It had been petty, sure, but it had also been necessary. Sometimes you have to be willing to make noise, literally and figuratively, to create change. Sometimes you have to fight battles that seem small and ridiculous on the surface because they represent something much larger underneath. My $200 fine had sparked a community transformation. Elderly residents no longer lived in fear of violations. Families felt welcomed rather than surveilled. The neighborhood had become what it was always supposed to be, a place where people looked out for each other rather than looking for reasons to punish each other. "Stephen, Coco's ready," Emma called from inside. I took one last look at the peaceful, snowy street, then headed inside to warmth and comfort, and the life I had built in this place I now called home. The midnight snow removal rebellion was over, but its legacy lived on in every community gathering, every volunteer project, every neighbor helping neighbor without fear or hesitation. And honestly, that was worth a lot more than $200.